So we're not there to see if you can deliver on that particular level of design. It's in your portfolio. We're there to figure out whether or not we can work with you.
Hey Growth Tech, welcome back. I'm your host, Tyler Sumala, and we are continuing to dive into the top 10 questions that I get from architecture firm owners most often. And today, I've invited my friend Evelyn Lee to dive into how to attract clients who actually value design. But we jump into why that might not be the right question and why it helps to reframe the way that you're thinking about design in your practice. Plus, what clients actually care about when hiring an architect. And before we jump in, a huge thanks to our friends at the American Institute of Steel Construction for sponsoring Season 4 of the Growth Tech podcast. Here is a fun fact for you. Did you know all domestically produced steel beams and columns are 100% recyclable and contain, on average, 92% recycled content? You can learn more about sustainable steel at aisc.org/sustainable. That is aisc.org/sustainable. Check it out, and let's go ahead and jump in. Evelyn, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited to jump into it because I continue to hear from architecture firm owners when I'm speaking to them, this desire that they have, and the question, this kind of open question of like, hey, how do I attract clients that actually value design? And I'm curious on what your initial reaction to that question is.
I think the interesting thing with architects is that when we establish our businesses, it's usually out of a certain passion, right? Large firms or even medium-sized firms, if there's a person they want to hold on to that's moving away, they're like, oh, well, maybe we should just stand an office up there. Like, go stand an office up. I think a lot of small practitioners, especially sole proprietors, when they get started out, it's because they want a different work-life balance, or they want something else that their firm isn't providing, that they just feel like they can get it better on their own. So when we go and start our businesses, it's very passionate driven, right? And for me, that question that you asked is passion driven through the lens of the architect versus I think any other business or entrepreneur that's looking to stand up a new business in a market is like, where's the biggest opportunity aligned with my skills and how do I go after that? And I think that's the match that you should be making, not necessarily how do I, and design is so subjective. I will tell you a lot of clients probably think they love design, but it may be in your mind a very gaudy design. So it's that question's too hard to answer, and it's not the right question.
We're gonna answer it though. We're gonna answer it.
Okay.
We're gonna dive in kind of throughout the time because I agree with you. And as I said, or at least as listeners know, what I did for this season to come up with these questions was, basically gather 4 months worth of coaching transcripts and identify, what were the top 10 questions that I get from architecture firm owners. And so I actually fully agree. I think this is a very difficult question to answer, but I also think it's the wrong question. But we'll dive into that because one of the reasons that I really wanted to bring you on, Evelyn, is because you've spent a considerable amount of time both on the architecture side of things and then also on the client side of things, which pretty much not many architects can say that. So you are a unicorn in the space. But please give us a little bit of an introduction to you.
So I'm a licensed architect. I worked in the field for 5 years, doing a lot of K through 12 and community projects. And then I went back to school, got my MBA, my MPA, came out, went into strategy. And strategy was really looking at expanding architectural services. So I was still on the architecture side, but looking at what can we offer pre and post architectural services. And then for the last, 5-7 years before going off on my own and starting my own consulting business, I was on the client side. So I was doing workplace consulting essentially for brokerage, where I was more or less the owner's rep and standing up the RFPs and being on the other side of the interview table. And then I went in-house to Slack and later Salesforce during our acquisition. And again, I was doing the RFP writing and being the one that was making the decisions about what architects we bring on.
Yes. which is a magical place, right? It's the room that every architect wants to be in, but they're
Yes.
not in. So
Yes.
yeah, so it's really, I think there's so much value in those conversations and in those things that you've learned and that you've witnessed and that you've participated in, and understanding like how these decisions are actually made. And I think that's why, this question at its core, how do I attract clients who actually value design? In my opinion, is actually the wrong question. Because I think architects, when they're asking that question, they're actually thinking about the wrong thing. They're not thinking about the client as much as they're thinking about the client what they want the client to be, right? They want the client, they basically want their client to kind of be another architect, right? That
in a way,
yeah.
I guess you could get a little bit more specific about the question and say, like, how do I find clients that like my type of design?
It could even be that too. But I think that, it's like design is the vehicle, but it's not the end game. And maybe that's the challenge with the question, right? So like, we know that design is going to help us give the clients the outcome that they want, but that doesn't mean that clients are coming to you like for that design outcome. They're coming to you for the outcome of, in your case, right, of writing these RFPs is they're looking for, an expanded office space, or they want to increase the productivity of their workplace or something like that. And so design is 1000% like needed and an important factor in making that decision, but it might not be the factor, right? Like the primary factor, because they're going to be still looking at what is like, who's going to be able to deliver me the outcome that I want, regardless of the vehicle that they're using to get there.
That too. And I think there is an opportunity, especially with individuals like you and I, where we talk about this expanded notion of design, right? And you can even break that into a project. So there's a pure aesthetic of like, these are the outcomes that I need to win our quote unquote architecture design awards, which is a very specific type of design. But then, like you said, there's like process and operations. And I actually think like that's a bigger value that architects deliver on that we don't talk enough about. Like I will learn your environment and help it create efficiencies for you within your environment. And that's a different aspect of design, but also and arguably even more valuable to the client in the end. But also the client doesn't know that that's what they're seeking either.
That's right. Yeah, actually, that's a really good point, though. The client can come in kind of being unaware or uneducated about the value that an architect can actually bring and the problems that they're actually able to solve. So yeah, that's a really good point, especially in a B2B setting. Understanding those operational components that you're playing a part in from a design perspective. I mean, again, design is the thing that you're using to make those operational efficiencies, but it's the operational efficiency that they want. It's not the design that they want. Right.
Or if you want, because I imagine you work with a lot of small and medium-sized architecture firms. So if we're looking at residential, the design from the programmatic aspect of a house, right? Like if you have a client that is like, oh, I want a wonderful kitchen. And then you, through your investigation, find out that they want a wonderful place to entertain, but they don't cook at all, and they actually bring in a lot of catering. The size of that kitchen can either be really big, probably initially in the client's mind, or you could like shove it all into a like catering closet and have a big entertainment space. And that's a different type of programmatic design, right? So, yeah.
That's a great point. And I think that's probably something that every architect can speak to, because I know in Charlotte, where I live, there's a ton of seemingly beautiful homes going up all of the time. And it's so easy to tell just from looking at the images, or you can go to an open house and see the difference between a home that actually was done by an architect and one that doesn't, right? Because you can get these kind of beautiful builder homes that have great materials and great finishes and absolutely have the worst flow of space that you could ever imagine, that just makes no sense and is incredibly inefficient in the way that it's laid out. Versus, you can go to an architect home that's half of the size, but way more livable because of the way that the spaces are pieced together. Why do you think that this is such a common, question from architect.
You mean when you put all of your interviews together, why did this come to the top?
Yeah.
Because I feel like we always, and we're taught that way, right? We're taught to be designers in school. So of course you want to find that client that lets you do the design that you want to do. So inherently they believe they're asking the right question because it has everything to do with what we taught and what we want to do and how we want to deliver, and what we want to deliver. So I don't know. That's a very circular answer to your question, but I think it's just inherent to where the passion of architects are. And not to say we can't be passionate or we shouldn't be passionate about design. I just think we should be equally passionate about how we approach, how we get to the design that we don't want to design.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. It goes back to that. It kind of goes back to what you were saying at the beginning of this, of the passion of architects, and especially when you're thinking about an architect that has made the decision to start their own business, kind of like what you were saying before, it's not usually necessarily because there's a gap in the market, right? They might not be thinking about it in the same way. It's because of these other things that they have those passions for. They have a desire to take more ownership over the project and over the design, and they have a desire to work more closely with clients, and they have a desire to be more in control of their lifestyle and of their time and of the where they're spending it, right? And so there's these other factors that come into play, but what precedes all of that still, usually, even as you're working your way up through a firm, is design, right? Is still there, right, like every step of the way. And usually, especially internally at a firm, it's still the priority in many respects. In those internal conversations that can even come before. I mean, we've all been in the conversation at some point or another where it's like the client wants this, but we want to do that.
Well, and not only that, that's how we usually pick our first employer, right? We look at the firm's portfolio as much as anything else, right? Like we go to a certain firm because we want to do that type of design.
That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's how we choose it, and it becomes kind of it's like our filter for making decisions, right? Pretty much from the beginning, especially in school. But then, to your point, even after school, you're using design as a filter to make your career decisions usually, and then when you get a business, you want to then continue that and use it as a filter to make your client decisions. We've kind of talked about this a little bit in terms of the common mistakes that architects might be making when they try to address this question, in the sense that it's kind of the wrong question to be asking. But what else have you seen as being the common mistake among architects that are kind of, let's say, leading with design as the primary value proposition?
I think this is actually independent of whether or not they're leading with design. I don't know how many interviews I've been in where it is clear the architect made no effort to more deeply understand the company and the company's design aesthetics and how it would fit with their design aesthetics, or try to investigate. I mean, these days when you do a calendar invite, for the most part, you actually see who else is invited to the calendar invite. So it's very easy to kind of go in and investigate the people that you will be interviewing with. There's so many times where an architect came into an interview and you can tell they're responding to the RFP, but it felt like they were trying to put their, what's the right word? I'm trying to think of the right word.
It's almost like, tell me if I'm like, don't say this if it's not true, but it's like they were responding to the RFP as if they were their own client.
Yes, exactly. Right. They were putting like their overlay onto it to us. And I was like, and the whole time I'm just like, why are you a good match to work with us? And it was really like, here's our process and here's how we work. And it's even in the language that architects kind of tend to use. It's not about, they kind of talk about partnership, but then it's just like, here's how we're going to shoehorn you into our way of doing things. And then we will deliver to you our design. That makes sense.
That does. It's a really important point to make, because you were talking about the language, right? And the examples that you're using is the architect standing in front of the room of stakeholders who are going to be making a decision on which architect to choose. And everything that the architect's saying is about what they're going to do.
Yes.
Right? So they're standing
Yeah.
in front, they're saying, here's how our process works. Here's what we do. Here's how I work. Here's the types of designs that we have versus here's what we noticed when we took a look at your company and what you have.
Mhm.
And after reading through the RFP and comparing it with some of the other projects that we've done, it seems like this is the type of outcome that you're looking for. Does that sound about right?
Right. And I would say, especially the younger companies, they are really looking for true partnership and collaboration. And I hear architects say partnership and collaboration all the time, because I think we all want to believe we are great collaborators and great partners. But there's a certain level of care in investigation of your potential partner that should take place in order for us to like truly believe that. So the interesting thing about working at a place like Slack is that, and for those of you who use Slack, and I know very few architects do, is that
That's how Evelyn and I communicate.
I know is how deeply Stuart Butterfield, the original founder, actually cared about design, and that showed up in our offices. And we had a lot of award-winning offices, like if you bothered to look at the office portfolio, but. Yeah, it was just so interesting. And then also, frankly, people didn't know who to address in the interview, right? And it was astonishing, even more so to me, how many people addressed me like I wasn't an architect, because they didn't even bother to look up. Like,
Yeah. Just take a moment to look at who's in the room and
look at who's in the room.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, the people that like came into the room and just said like, "Oh, Evelyn, I listened to your latest episode of Practice Disrupted." Like that created that single little opening line. It just made me so much more interested in anything that they had to say. They had to say than somebody who like went in and started in with like, "This is who I am and this is what I've done and who are you again?" So yeah.
All right, growth techs, check this out. In Boulder and Atlanta, old buildings came down, but their steel beams did not go to waste. They went straight into new projects, and that is the power of U.S.-made structural steel. So here is how it works. Instead of relying on virgin iron and blast furnaces, we actually use modern technology to melt recycled scrap in electric arc furnaces, and that produces 6 million tons of the most sustainable steel in the world every single year. And the carbon footprint keeps shrinking. It's already down 12% in the last 3 years, and as our power grid moves toward renewables, it'll keep falling. Steel is strong, it lasts for decades, and it can be reused over and over without losing quality. It is a natural fit for adaptive reuse and for sustainable design, and if you want to put it to work, then download the free sustainability toolkit from our sponsor at aisc.org/buildgreen. That is aisc.org/buildgreen, one word there at the end. Go and check it out, and we'll get back to the show. Everyone is always self-interested, and you cannot forget that. So if you start off the entire relationship with it being all about you, you're already kind of setting yourself up for failure. And what you're talking about is these are such like small and simple steps that you can take. It doesn't take long, depending, I mean, like you said, like you can see who's going to be in the meeting just by looking at the calendar invite. It doesn't take long. That might be depending on the size of the stakeholders that you're meeting with. It might be 5 people or it might be 15. But either way, we're talking about like 5 to 30 minutes of a little bit of research just to understand who's going to be in the room. And then also at the beginning, I was just doing a workshop inside of the studio yesterday, and I was talking about, especially for B2B or for responding to RFPs, if you are speaking to more than one person for like an introductory call or for an RFP or for any kind of presentation, and you don't know who the other people in the room are, you need to pause. The very first thing that you should say at that meeting is, "Hey, well, let's just go around the room really quick. And can you just briefly introduce me, like tell me who you are and what your role in this process is," right? So that you know who you're speaking to, because there's going to be different people throughout the entire time. So just address it at the beginning of the presentation or at the beginning of the meeting.
Yeah, and people's digital footprints are so big. Like, so even if you're doing a residential product, because I don't want to leave them out of this conversation, it's not too hard to find people on Instagram or TikTok. Some people even have their Pinterest boards like public. So, you might be able to hunt down their Pinterest board, about what they're looking for in a project even before you like get to that interview. So there is definitely ways to investigate the individual right now for, like B2C type of work. And the other thing is, if you are going into one of these more formal B2B conversations, you can always ask the meeting setter who's going to be in the meeting and get that information way ahead of time. So, I mean, and if they tell you like, oh, I don't know, then you just ask the question. There's no harm in asking the question.
Yeah, that's right. There's almost never any harm in asking a question, especially that one. Figuring out who's in the room. You just have to be a little bit more resourceful. That's all we're saying. Hey, just like reach out to the setter, do a little bit of research up front, and we're kind of leading our way. We started with the common mistakes, and we found our way a little bit towards walking through almost like a step-by-step process that architects can take to address this question, right? So if you're asking, how do I attract clients who actually value design? The first step has absolutely nothing to do with you and nothing to do with design and almost nothing to do with value. The first step is actually, hey, take a second to research who you're actually working with, who you're actually speaking to. Look at who they are, look at the type of work that they've done, look at the company profile, look at their bios, and try to get an understanding and a sense for what it is that they're looking for. And that's just the people, right? But then you were also saying, don't stop there. Like, look more holistically at what it is that they're doing, or look at the company and look at the background of the company, and just take a moment to understand, almost like reading between the lines of, if we're talking about an RFP, like you have to read between the lines of the RFP. Those things are dry and boring usually. No offense to you that might have written those in the past. But they have to follow a certain structure, right? So they can't necessarily, be brimming to the edge with personality in a way. So
no, but another way to look at it is, so Slack, for instance, is not infamous, but actually I think famously known for their social media responses. So you can kind of understand the character of the company if you like go and read what they're posting on social and how they're posting. And then every company these days has to have some type of graphical presence, right? So whether it's just kind of making inferences from things as simple as their logo, or if they have any reports or research like papers out, like that's kind of another inference of how deeply do they care about design and organization and how they tell their own story.
So for the architects that, they're saying, all right, now I'm going to take some time to see who it is I'm meeting with. I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the company and the profiles of the people at the company, so that I have a more holistic perspective on who it is I'm addressing and what it is I'm addressing. How do they then approach that conversation to position themselves in the best way, from your perspective, having been on the other side of the table?
That's hard. I mean, there's a lot of architects that came in that I get really, I leave the interview just like frustrated with them because I was like, this is how you show up as architects to the rest of the world. But there are a lot of architects where I leave feeling really engaged, and I'm like, this is how architects show up in the world.
What is actually the difference between those?
I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but I think it's really how much of a conversation you try to make out of the interview process, right? Because then I get a sense of not only who you are, but the type of questions that you'll be asking, what it's like to work with you. Like, you kind of just want to set up the opportunity for an architect to truly engage with you, like as if that was the first meeting of a project, rather than being a used car salesman. Because we are selling services, and services inherently are, the ability for a project to be successful is inherently based on how well we work together. Like, ultimately, you're selling you're selling to me that you are the best partner for me to choose for this project. And frankly, unless I have an unlimited budget that can get me the star architect and the high design architect, most people if they take one look at your website and they're like, yeah, I like what you're delivering, most people are more concerned with, is this a person that I want to be partnering with for the next year, 3 years, 5 years, however long that project's going to last.
I think what you just said is extremely important, and I hope that everyone is listening to that, because essentially what you're saying is that I think it's easy to think about this at a smaller level, like think a residential architect that's working with individuals or with families, but you're also saying even at a B2B level, when there's multiple, like many stakeholders at the table, you're saying even then, this decision is still largely emotional, right? This is an emotional decision. This is a human connection that people are looking for. Is this someone that I actually think I can work with? And it's really hard to know that if you haven't engaged, like you said, in a conversation with those people, right?
Yes.
So basically, it's better to show up to that with questions rather than to show up to it with design boards that are already predetermined based on a boatload of assumptions that they're making about the team.
Yeah, and know that if you made it to the interview process, whether it's a residential or a big company, we've already done our filter on you too, right? Like we've already looked at your portfolio and said, like,
you passed
okay,
the design test.
we think, yeah, you passed our design test. So we're not there to see if you can deliver on that particular level of design. It's in your portfolio. We're there to figure out whether or not we can work with you.
That's such a great point. Yes. Especially like once you've made it that far, there's been a decision that's already been made. You've passed some kind of filter, and at this point, they're really looking at it from a relational standpoint. How do you think firm owners can know if they're making progress or if they're moving in the right direction, and how they're approaching these conversations, and how they're and whether they're attracting the right clients and the right work?
You can look at it kind of like the evolution of a podcast, right? In the beginning, you're doing a lot of the outreach. If your podcast begins doing well and is reaching the right type of people, it becomes a lot easier to find guests, I think, right? Because then people are reaching out to you saying, I want to be guests on your podcasts. I wish when architects start their firm, and I would hope that architects in the future, when they start their firm, they are figuring out, like, where do the type of clients I want that I can serve tend to show up the most, and how do I show up there first to make that connection sooner rather than later. But I think, how you know that you are making the right connection is, how often are those connections coming back and picking up the phone and calling you? And you could even use is that connection I made, did they go ahead and make the connection with me on LinkedIn? Did they go ahead and subscribe to my newsletter? Are they opening my newsletters? These are all data points that you can begin to track. But I think it's kind of funny, but it's like, how do you measure an increase in your digital connection with them after the relationship? And then if you are truly getting all the clients or getting out to the right people at the right time, then I would hope that you would see a greater influx of people coming to you rather than you having to go out to them. I don't know if I actually answered your question in the end.
No, I think that's a great point, because you're essentially saying, like, it's a self-sustaining cycle if you're doing it right.
Right.
That's kind of what you're saying, right? It's like,
yes.
Okay, so if you start off from the right point and say, and you're intentional about who are the types of clients I'm going to go for, where can I find them? How do I make sure that I'm there so they see me, they meet me, they know me, right? How do I deliver value to them in different ways? You mentioned a newsletter, you mentioned on social media, you mentioned in these ways that allow yourself to, and on a podcast, right? That allow you to be present and in their world, so they can continually see you and kind of become part of your ecosystem in some way, so that when the time comes where they are looking for an architect that does XYZ and you do XYZ, you are the first person that comes to mind.
Right. I actually, so a good example is, I recently learned actually in your area that there is a culmination of kind of mid-century homes, right?
In North Carolina?
Yeah. There is a gentleman who has been like cataloging all the mid-century homes in North Carolina. He does, and he even has get-togethers and stuff like that. So, if you are an architect who loves to deliver on mid-century homes, then how do you find people who want a mid-century home in your space? Like, you don't go to, totally making this up, but you don't go to like the Victorian house, like homeowners association, but like it's just making the right alignments to find the audience that you want to find that aligns with your design aesthetics.
Yeah, that's a great point. Also, I'm going to need you to share that information with me because I'd love to find more mid-century modern homes. I'm on Redfin always looking for these things because I would love for us to move into a mid-century modern home, the next home that we move into. And it's hard for me to find them. Yeah.
I will send that to you.
Yeah.
You might have to edit that out of the podcast, but I will send it to you. Yeah.
I'm gonna chase them down. But yeah, you're exactly right. You really have to be thinking about the audience that you are marketing and speaking to. And actually, this comes up super often in my conversations. So I'll be talking with architects about what they're doing to reach out to the clients that they want, right? And they're like, oh, I just started, I've started posting on social media. I post on Instagram or I post on LinkedIn. Okay, cool. Let's go look at some of the posts. And the posts are still in some funny way written to architects. They're written to other architects rather than being like written for their audience. And I think it's almost like a subconscious thing at that point because it's so hard to make that jump. It's so hard to make that jump.
It's subconscious, but if you think about it, it's something that we've been doing since architecture school.
That's right. Yeah, it's automatic.
Because it's like what's the critique process, right? Mm-hmm. Of like, this is my project. Like you're selling to your professors, you're selling to visiting jury critiques, like your project. So I think like and the architecture behind your project, you're rarely ever we don't communicate how to communicate to the general public about our projects.
Yes, I would fully love for all architecture juries in school to, instead of being visiting professors from other schools, to be just people that they pull off of the sidewalk outside.
And the community. Oh, that would be interesting. Yeah.
That'd be so much better. You have to learn how to communicate and tell a story to them and not be so jargon heavy. So I think, we've kind of gotten a little bit to the root of it here, right? So if you find yourself asking, how do I attract clients who actually value design? I would reframe that question and say, how do I deliver the best outcome for clients using design, right? How do I make that value clear? And in doing that, right, there's a few different things that you need to do before you even think about design. It's thinking about the people. It's thinking about your clients. It's thinking about who they are and what they do and what their aesthetics are and what their needs are. And there's so much discovery, like you were saying, there's so much discovery that has to happen before you can really think about the best and ideal outcome that you are providing for that client.
Right. And just always remember that if they reached out to you, or even if you reached out to them and they responded to you, most likely they've gone and looked at your website and said, I like what this firm is doing, or I like what this individual is doing. So they are going to be interested in the design that you are already offering. It's just really how well are we going to work together?
That's right. Yeah. It's like you've already passed the design filter. How can you prove that you would be a good relationship for me to have and that you'd be easy to work with? Yeah, that's a great point. Evelyn, thank you so much for joining us. Where can the Growth Techs go to learn more about you and what you're doing?
LinkedIn. I think you and I both post a lot on LinkedIn. So follow me on LinkedIn, or you can go and check out my consultancy, which I'm still building out, but go to practiceofarchitecture.com or come and listen to my podcast at Practice Disrupted, which is practiceofarchitecture.com/podcast.
Yes. An amazing podcast, by the way. Much better than this one.
No.
So go listen to that. But Evelyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah. Thank you, Tyler.
All right, Growth Detect, that is a wrap on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you enjoy the podcast, then please take 30 seconds to share a review and tell me your favorite part so that I can keep making it better for you. And hey, if you want to work with me directly to increase your fees and start winning the biggest projects of your career, then send me an email at hello@growthdetect.com with the word grow. That is it. Just email me the word grow at hello@growthdetect.com and I will get you sorted out. All right, I'll see you next time, friends.